Hi, my name is Andrea Richmond, and get ready because we have March Madness, aka my version of it, Mad Marchness, coming soon to a TV near you, or should I say a Twitch stream near you. But before we get into that, Selection Sunday is just around the corner this 15th on Sunday at 8 p.m. So before that, I decided to do a little bit of an experiment. Coach Geno Auriemma of the UConn women's basketball team said that he doesn't want all these conferences, especially these P4 programs that you see right behind me. He doesn't like the fact that there are 7, 8, 9 of them who are going into the tournament. So let's do a little bit of an experiment, shall we? I want to choose only the top 5, I believe, teams that should be in the March Madness tournament. And which 5 will I choose of these P5 schools, or P4 schools, I should say? Well, let's do an experiment and find out my top 5 that should automatically make the tournament of these options. And let's start off, of course, with none other than the Big 12 tournament. Now, as you guys know, and as you should know, automatic bids, hey, if you're a winner, chicken dinner, that means you're going to the tournament. So I have this whiteboard here. This is where we're going to know just exactly who's going to win who. And for this one in the Big 12, you see West Virginia is the winner. Comments on West Virginia. Obviously, West Virginia, Jordan Harrison and crew, great defensive team. Can really do some damage. Wheeler down low as well. They're a fun team to watch out for, and that's the reason why they beat TCU, right? TCU, I think I'm going to end up putting them in that second spot. Why? Because if you look at TCU's wins, especially out of conference, there's a little bit more to be desired, but they did end up getting a win against teams like NC State. They are second in the conference, and actually they ended up winning the conference, right, in the regular season, and have just done some damage, really beating down teams that I feel like could end up being very good in the tournament a little bit later on, like Baylor. Totally beat them down. Didn't do well in some games out of conference, but we're going to go ahead and give that nod to TCU. A good defensive team with Basham. You also have players like Olivia Miles, Martha Suarez, who can put points on the board. 3-point shooting as well with Bigsby and Donovan Hunter. Very fun team to watch. Now, let's start to look at this semifinal, right? Shout out to KSU, right? KSU went on a tear, and that's something that should be given a lot of credit for. Obviously, as a lower seed, getting all the way to the semifinal, playing 4 games in a row, and making only a 10-point game against the leader in the conference. You deserve your credit. You deserve your flowers. KSU, in case you didn't know, they also beat Ole Miss earlier in the season, so shout out to them. I just don't think that they have enough wins in the Big 12 to really propel them forward. Colorado, again, it's about those out of conference wins. Weren't really saying anything with me, but they still did a very good job against a team like Texas Tech, right? And that's a team where unfortunately we are going to be looking at, because Texas Tech only 4 losses when it comes to the greater look in the Big 12, and they have had their share of big wins, really pushing a lot of these Big 12 teams, including beating a team like Baylor as well. I gotta be honest, when I was looking through it, I wasn't going to initially think that Texas Tech was going to be my third pick, but Texas Tech, Bailey Maupin and crew, they've been a really good job. Also, Snuda, very good on that coach. Number 4, now this is where it becomes a little bit tricky. First of all, Molly Miller, all the love in the world to Molly Miller, right? Arizona State have been a very fun team to watch, obviously coming from Grand Canyon University, totally flipping around the win total when it comes to Arizona State, getting deep into the weekend and only losing to the conference winner, right? You look at the team that they ended up beating, though, Iowa State. We thought things might have turned the corner when it came to Iowa State. Beating Iowa, their crosstown rival, in a very nice game. Ended up sitting, I believe, Audie Crooks in the middle of that fourth quarter. They were really dominant in that game, but since that, they've slowed down a lot, incurred a lot of losses in the tournament. I believe even a loss to Kansas. Iowa State, they just fell off when it comes to their play. Baylor, though, they're an interesting team. Baylor sticking around and doing their thing. You also have OK State. Really, this is a toss-up. It could be anybody's. I'm going to go ahead and probably give the nod to Baylor and also OK State. OK State, Staley Hurd and crew. Honestly, if you look at that replay, watch that Kansas State game again. Got charged for the reach-in. Probably should have ended up winning that game. Did some close games though against the crew. Very good against Colorado and crew, splitting some matchups between the two. Also, too, Iowa State couldn't end up beating some of these teams in Baylor. Although they did end up losing against TCU twice, and also did lose against Texas in a beatdown. They've tested themselves out of schedule, and they've also won a lot in conference. So going to give the nod to Baylor. Let's move on to the SEC after we finalize the Big 12. West Virginia, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, and OK State. Let's move on, though, to SEC, the SEC action. And as you see right there at the top, none other than the Longhorns. Madison Booker and crew have been great. Rory Harmon, too. It's the extras that can get it done for them as well. Texas beating UCLA and South Carolina twice. I mean, that speaks for itself. Some of the best teams in the country, even best teams in other conferences like Richmond, Texas, a team to beat. And also, South Carolina knows that they're a team to beat. I'm just going to go ahead and pin them in. And I shouldn't have to write too much of a justification or say too much of a justification for Don Staley and crew. Obviously, beating Texas, have been undefeated against LSU, honestly, and beating down a team in Vandy who I'll get into. A team in Vandy who really wrecked the rest of the SEC, but still could not get over the South Carolina hump. And also, too, if you want, playing against Duke and beating Louisville as well. Don Staley, never to be messed with, I'll tell you that, right? Beating USC as well. This is more interesting when we start to look outward, right? Because you have teams like LSU. You have teams like Oklahoma. When I give some credit to Kentucky, they played South Carolina close. They also beat LSU. But just too many losses recently that really detracted me, I should say, away from Kentucky. Also beat Ole Miss. But Ole Miss is an interesting case, right? Beating Vandy twice. And Vandy's a very interesting team because they went 22-0, beating all their teams out of conference, and then also to wrecking havoc in the SEC. You have Oklahoma, who has occurred some losses to a lot of these teams, but then did beat South Carolina in overtime. So that's really propping up their odds. Let's see, I only have Texas. I only have South Carolina. I have to go Vandy. I know they did lose to Ole Miss, and that was rough in the conference tournament. We didn't expect for them to be kicked so soon. I would to go 22-0, and then also really take care of the business against teams like Kentucky and such. They deserve to be up here. So we're going to type in Vandy. But then at that 4th spot, that's where it gets a little interesting. Oklahoma, LSU, Oklahoma, LSU. Listen, if you know me about LSU, I hate the fact. Kim Mulkey, please play some real teams out of conference schedule. They love to play against West Dakota School of the Hearing, of the Deaf, of the Performing Arts. They're really frustrating to watch out of conference, but in conference, they seem to get it together. Had a lockdown against a team like Oklahoma, beating them twice. I'm going to go ahead and give them the nod. And honestly, how can I not give Ole Miss the nod? Obviously, losing against Alabama, very rough, but we're able to beat Vandy twice along with teams like Tennessee, played close against Texas. I'm going to go ahead, not Texas the second time, Texas in season. We're going to go ahead and give it to Ole Miss. So Ole Miss is Texas, South Carolina, Vandy, LSU, and Ole Miss in the top 5 for the SEC. In the ACC, well, let's be honest about the ACC. The ACC is so weak. I'm tempted to only just choose 4 teams out of this conference, and I think I might as well. The ACC, a very rough, historically rough year. A lot of transfers out of the ACC. Hopefully next year they'll retool. I think teams like Virginia have a chance to really bump it up later on. I think teams like Clemson, they have a whole bunch of players coming in, 4 stars coming in for them. They should be interesting, but the ACC right now, a lot to be built. shout out to Cal, Stanford with my girl Haley Swain from Atlanta, Georgia. Cal has Puff the Magic Dragon. I feel like they're going to be some very good teams. Also, too, Syracuse has my girl Uche Izoje, very talented player, but obviously Duke is the one. Shout out to Carl Lawson and crew. I'll be honest, I was one of the first people to really not how Duke played early on in the season. Didn't look like anybody knew where that ball was going, but towards the end of the season, by time conference play, ooh, they knew. Was not good out of conference, but to be fair, played against some tough opponents like UCLA. They were able to correct themselves, and that is why they are winners of their conference, right? You have a team like Louisville, right? Louisville, obviously, towards the end of the season, if they did not get beat by Notre Dame, which I'll talk about a little bit soon, they would have ended up winning the conference, right? So during the regular season, at least when it comes to regular season wins. Now, Louisville, they have had their ups and downs, but for the most part, Louisville has kept it together. They're second in the conference because they've beaten a lot of good teams. We are going to give it to Louisville. Losing to teams like South Carolina, obviously, but Louisville, I like the fact that they've lost to Iowa. They've lost to a lot of other teams. They've tested themselves out of conference, and I do have to note that, unfortunately, this year, when it comes to the ACC, a little bit weaker, that we're able to beat teams like UNC. As I said, Virginia, shout out to them, and Clemson. They're rebuilding, tools in the way, Stanford as well. Notre Dame. Now, Notre Dame is a team, I'm going to be telling you, honestly, earlier in the year, I wouldn't have given them any credit, especially when they end up being beat by Virginia. I was very much tempted to get them out of Dodge and thought that they wouldn't be able to make the tournament, but they had that win against USC earlier in the year, and then you also have this conference tournament tear where you're playing against NC State, you're dominating against them, close game against Duke, beating Miami. Listen, my Notre Dame, they've had their struggles, but beating Louisville and things like that towards the end of the year, they're starting to turn it on at the right time. So that's why I would have never thought this to start the year, but ND, going to be my third pick for this conference, and because the conference is so anemic, you're looking at 4, right? This is where we choose that battle between NC State and UNC. UNC, if you look at their record, unfortunately, they haven't won against a lot of teams, but at least they did their damage against teams like UCLA. It was a beatdown. But I like Indy Navarre, little Arnie that could. Arnie Salo can score some buckets, and Delaney Grant as well. Look at NC State. I like Zoe Brooks and crew. I really like Zam Jones. They just couldn't put it all together. And in times where you feel like they're really starting to find themselves, it fizzles out. That loss to Rhode Island really hurts. I know Rhode Island went ahead and they won their conference title. Shout out to them winning that American. But I just can't do it. That loss to Rhode Island really sealed the deal for me for NC State. I'm going to go ahead and go with UNC in this spot, right? So that's it for the ACC. Duke, Louisville, Notre Dame, and UNC. I wasn't lying when I said they're so weak. It probably should be 4 going into the tournament in general, right? This is a practice. Obviously, teams and conferences like the SEC, yeah, they're going to have more than the 5 that I've chosen to go on in Selection Sunday, but it's hard for me to justify it in the SEC, in the ACC, I should say. However, in the Big Ten, I think even more than the SEC, that there are some teams that can do some damage in the March Madness tournament from the Big Ten. It's not the SEC this year that I feel like is the big dog. I feel like it's the Big 12 that had the closest battles interconference-wise, but it's the Big Ten that I feel like individually against all these teams can either have some good games, maybe some close games, and push a lot of teams. But obviously the top dog in that conference, it's UCLA. Let's be honest, I don't know why we're having this argument about UCLA not being the number 1 overall seed. Yes, they're not undefeated, but when their only loss is to the SEC title champ, and then when you look at the fact that they have beaten so many ranked opponents, totally outpacing UConn, If it were any other team but UConn that were undefeated, we would not be having these conversations. But this is another conversation for another day. Complete team overall, Lauren Betts, Kiki Rice, Gabriela Jaquez. When you have good players already improve and get to another upper echelon, all these players, WNBA draft picks, I think immediate impact players for their teams, right? Iowa. I think I'm probably leaning to be my number 2 here. Why Iowa is not just because the fact that they ended up going to the conference championship, in which they did get beat down by UCLA, but Jan Jensen and crew, there was no reason why this team got to number 2 spot in the Big Ten, because as I said, Big Ten has a lot of very talented teams and a lot of very talented players, but Jan Jensen really made sure to make this team, I feel like, a more complete, more deep team than even the Caitlin Clark Iowa teams. Really, Hannah Stuelke and crew, Ava Hayden, there's talent to go on. Tremlo, Sweet Chariot. They're a fun team. They're a connected team, and they go really deep into their bench. Had some wins against Michigan. I know they lost to Iowa State, but wins against Michigan, great beatdown against Michigan State, Illinois. They were a really good team. I think that we should be looking out for the Hawkeyes. Very good job by them throughout the regular season. Then you have a team like Michigan. Now, Michigan, a lot of their wins were theoretical wins. Obviously, pushing teams like UCLA and pushing teams like UConn will get you a lot of love. They absolutely destroyed Notre Dame, locked down Hannah Hidalgo really well earlier in the year, but it was towards the end of the year where they really got their wins, right? Instead of the theoretical wins. Ended up winning against Ohio State, against Maryland. They're a very fun team. Obviously losing to Iowa. I think Iowa just has their number, but the sophomores from Michigan are going to cause problems in this Big Ten for a long time. They get my 3 spot. Number 4, though, I think is their hometown rival. Iowa, obviously, Ohio, I should say. Obviously, losing against Michigan in overtime, though. Ohio State, they've bounced back in big ways, losing Cody McMahon, but have still been able to do a good job. Jelani Cambridge should be Big Ten Player of the Year. And I'm a big Lauren Betts fan, but Jelani Cambridge been putting her team on the back. Kennedy Cambridge, her twin, also been very good defensively. Big wins against Minnesota. Obviously, I think they ended up losing to Washington, but have had some very good wins. I also believe against Iowa as well. Ohio State, I believe they also went against TCU during the regular season as well. So give me OHIO, Ohio State. The Ohio State will get my 4 spot. And this is where it becomes interesting, because I like a lot of these teams. Oregon has a great sophomore 1-2 punch coming, and S. Atute and also Katie Fiesel. They'll be fun next year, but that's next year. Maryland, they got beat by Oregon, but Brenda Bob Freeze, never questioned the Bob. She's done a very good job despite the injuries and pushed his team to greater heights than they probably should have. Illinois is very young and talented. Michigan State, very defensively sound. Blair and also Rashonda Jones, very fun. Van Sluten, she be shooting. Minnesota, Maya Battle and crew, they've also had some very good victories, especially towards the end of the year as well. I also like Sila Swords, a very fun, Sila Sellers, I apologize, Savia Sellers, a very fun player at Washington. You have Jazzy Davis and crew at USC, so a lot of fan favorites around here, but when it comes to these teams, I'm looking at Minnesota, I'm looking at Maryland, and I got to go with the split here. I got to go with Maryland. Maryland has had some victories, split, I believe, Ohio State, been very good with Michigan, and also winning against Minnesota. So for that, I go with Maryland. Never forget the Bob. Brenda Bob Freeze getting it done. So let's look at this list and this board a little bit more close up, shall we? And hopefully we don't get any glare in the way. For the Big 12, if we can only choose 5, like Geno said, we're only choosing 5, right? West Virginia, TCU, Texas Tech, Baylor, and then OK State. For the SEC, Texas, South Carolina, Vandy, LSU, and Ole Miss, right? Duke for the ACC, Louisville, Notre Dame, and UNC. And for the Big Ten, UCLA, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, and Maryland. Now, There are, of course, going to be more in several of these conferences. In particular, I feel like the Big Ten and the SEC will obviously have more bids. I've forgotten teams like in Oklahoma. I've forgotten teams like in Alabama. Maybe Tennessee gets there because of their prestige. Kentucky as well. They've earned some wins, including against LSU. Then you also have some teams that I forgot to mention. Teams like a Michigan State, like a Washington that have had some really good battles as well, and also Minnesota too. It's really only that ACC where I feel like we're probably not going to get more teams, maybe one team, two if we're pushing it when it comes to the ACC. But guys, what do you think? Do you agree with Geno Auriemma saying that, hey, we need to let go of some of these big P4, P5 programs and let some of the mid-majors in? For instance, the A10, I feel like have four teams in Davidson, Richmond, in Rhode Island, and George Mason that can be pretty good in this tournament. Or should you let some of the more powerful conferences in? They're Power Four for a reason, because they have deep teams. Let me know what you think. And if you think that any of my lists needs a little bit of rearranging and some changing, I'm Boardy McBoard, aka Andrew Richmond, and make sure you're here for Mad Marchness. It's a mix between NFL Red Zone and also Mad Money. I'll be in costumes, I'll be having props, I'll be having soundboards, all while we celebrate the closest and tightest games during the March Madness chaos and fun weekends. We'll be here live the entire weekend through, but remember to make sure you're here for Selection Sunday. That is going to be the 15th at 8 p.m., probably a little bit earlier. I'll be on to talk about the board, and we'll be filling out this board behind me with more names before we get ready for that madness on Thursday the 20th. Thank you so much for watching. Watch some of my other content that's probably right here in front of me. Thank you so much. I'm Andrew Richmond. Check out my streams at twitch.tv/boredymcbored. And hey, I'll see you later. Ta-ta.